In this edition of Bahamian Heritage Series, we are about to take a walk down memory lane with 81-year-old Mrs. Naomi Moncur. Currently residing in Nassau, she hails from the quaint settlement of Turnbull, Long Island, in an era when almost everyone on the island worked their farms to produce corn, peas, beans, cabbages, and other vegetables, raised their own goats, sheep, pigs, cows, and chickens and eggs, seldom having to purchase food because they were self-sustaining. An era when families shared their produce with each other, when students left school at 14 years old to make their way in the world, when she and her siblings walked 3 miles to and from school every day, and when teachers were paid £1 16 shillings a month. She also recounts the details of a tragedy that hit her home in 1959. Stay tuned for this edition of Bahamian Heritage Series with Naomi Moncur. Preserve your family history with a video biography. Ask your parents and grandparents to tell the story of their lives. A personal history is a priceless gift for family, friends, and generations to come. Contact Barbara Wilson at 457-3188.
My name is Naomi Jeremy Rose Lopez Moncur. My date of birth, 6th of November, 1940. I am now 81. I will be 82 on the 6th of November, 2022. My parents were Bertram Thomas Lopez and Evelyn Anita Gibson Lopez. I was born in the quaint settlement of Turnbull, Long Island in the Bahamas. My parents were both from Long Island. My grandfather, I remembered him because he lived longer. He was Charles Gibson. That's my mother's father. And my father's father was Richard Lopez, that lived almost inside of Johnson Park's church. He is just on the opposite side of Johnson Park Church, and he died a few years ago. But my grandfather on my mother's side died about 8 years ago. My grandmother on my mother's side, we called her Ma Liza. She was Eliza Edgecombe Gibson. And my grandmother on my father's side, we called her Ma Lizzie. She was Elizabeth Raming. She was not married, so that was her maiden name. They all from Long Island and almost in the same settlement. I grew up in Long Island from birth until I was 18 years old when I migrated to New Providence.
Do you remember much about your early days in Long Island? Can you remember where you lived at the time?
Yes, I lived in Turnbull, not far from my grandparents. Neither of them. Both of my grandparents lived nearby. And there were 7 girls of us, okay, and 3 boys. We went to school. We had to walk about 3 miles from where we lived to go to school, and then walk 3 miles back in the evenings. So we lived in Turnbull, and we had to go to school out in Scrub Hill, which was the main part of the settlement, and it was on the main road where we now live. But at that time we lived in Turnbull. I could never forget that house. We had a large living room in the front, and usually in those days they used to have an extra bed in the front room, so that if persons came to visit or had to spend the night or so, they had some place to let them stay. And the rest of the house was my mother's and father's bedroom. The one next to theirs was my own, and my sister, we shared it, the one, Loretta. And there was another room for the boys. There were 2 boys at the beginning. Leslie came a bit late. When Leslie came, Leslie had his own bedroom. We didn't live far from the beach where our house was in Turnbull. You could stand in the yard and look out across and see the beach. So you could see them when they went fishing in their boats and everything. Usually when they went fishing, the neighborhood watched for when they came in because they were waiting to get fish to cook either for breakfast or dinner, whatever time they came in. And so they could stand in the yard and see the boat coming into the shore. And we were able to get out there to the boat in less than 5 minutes. And that was walking from home out there.
So what did your parents do for a living? What did your father do?
They were farmers, both of them. My mother and my father, and their parents were farmers too.
Okay, what did they farm? What type of?
They farmed for just about everything that they use. Corn, peas, beans, vegetables, cabbages. Oh, I remember my mom, they had a farm and she had a spot in that farm where they grew their vegetables. And we got fresh vegetables from the ground. We knew nothing about going to the shop to purchase any type of vegetable. As a matter of fact, we didn't purchase any food. The purchases that we made were minimal because like sugar and maybe kerosene oil and cooking oil like that we had to purchase from the shop. But anything else edible, they raised them.
Did you eat much meat back then or was it mainly fish?
Yeah, no, they ate a lot of meat, but they raised their creatures.
Okay.
My parents raised goats, they raised sheep, my grandfather raised pigs, he raised cows, and all of these things, and chickens, of course. They had their own eggs. We didn't know anything about buying eggs. And so you had all those things.
So a lot of that was sold to make money?
No, the majority of that was eaten. Some who had like a surplus, they would sell. But when they slaughtered the animals, it was usually like around Christmas time or, maybe 2-3 times for the year. My grandfather, he raised cows, so he always had fresh beef. And when they slaughtered their animals, the persons who lived in the neighborhood, everybody got. They bought, but it was cheap. He would sell them very reasonable. And most times they gave to the people in the community. They'd give you £1 or £2 so you would have to cook. And that's what they did with their fishing as well. When they went fishing, you went out we used to call it on the bay. And we'd go out there on the fishing boat, they'll come in and they'll scale and clean the fish. And you could purchase, or if not, if they didn't make a big catch for that day, they'd say, well, nothing to sell. They would give you to take to your parents, give somebody else to take to their parents, but they made sure that everybody in the community got something.
I find the last name Lopez interesting.
My father's father was not Bahamian. His mother had him for her slave master.
Okay.
So that his name came from somewhere in Cuba, in that area there. There were not many Lopez's, and they were all family.
Okay, interesting. So both of your parents farmed?
Both of them farmed.
Did you depend much on Nassau? Did they have mailboats at the time?
They had mailboats, but the mailboats used to take like about, if I recall, like 2 weeks to go and come. It's not like you leave Nassau today and you reach your destination tomorrow. And also, it was at a time when the Haitian boats came en masse. They brought their rum, I think they call it the bootlegging session or something like that, but they came and they traded their rum and things for food. They bought mangoes, they bought peas. Their products was sort of superior to what we raised. And they, would sell it off to get money to carry back
Right.
with them.
How was the economic climate at the time? Did you all have any great needs financially? Were you able to eat all the time? Were there any shortages?
No, not when we were really, well, when we were smaller and didn't know quite what was going on. There was a time when my mom said they called it a famine. Some people were able to raise enough crops to carry them through the year. Others, their crops, their produce weren't as successful. And so they depended on Auntie Sue or Uncle John or Uncle James, whoever had the most, that we'll go to them and get. And usually they had to purchase at that time. It wasn't given to them per se.
Right. What was the political climate at the time? Did you have any issues with racism or anybody that would have made you feel, uncomfortable about, being a black Bahamian? Did those things really affect you much on the family island?
No, not when we were small, not even after we were grown. It was as if whatever party was in power, it was accepted by our parents and grandparents and etc.
Did you travel to Nassau much as a child or travel at all as children?
No, not really. My father did because he used to go on a contract. And so we were home with Mommy. And she didn't travel to Nassau very much either. I could remember one time when she did because my father was not feeling well and she had to come to Nassau to be with him for a period of time. And we were left in the care of our grandmother, my father's mother, because my mother's mother died when I was about 3 years old. So I really didn't know her.
Okay.
When she died, Mommy just had two of us, myself and Loretta, the one that follows me.
Okay.
The rest of her children came afterwards.
So you were one of the older ones?
I am the
You
oldest.
are the oldest, okay.
I am.
What are the names of your siblings?
I'm Naomi, there's Loretta, there's Gwendolyn, then there's Lenwood. She had 3 girls and then a boy. And then she had 2 girls, Angela, who was a nurse, she's retired now, and Coraline. Coraline was an insurance executive, and she's now retired. As a matter of fact, just about all of Mommy's children are retired. And then after those 2 girls, there came a boy who was Kirk. He was a teacher in the Ministry of Education, and he had the privilege to travel to many of the family islands where he taught as headmaster.
Okay. And
He
his
was-
last name, it's Lopez, right?
He was the Lopez, yes. As a matter of fact, he was the first principal of the North Long Island High School.
Interesting. Okay.
He went to the college, Teachers College in San Salvador, and he ended up with his education. He started his education at home at the Scrubble All-Age School, but the teacher who was there saw that he had potential, so he sent him off here to Nassau, and he was able to get a scholarship, and he finished his education at St. Anne's. So he graduated from St. Anne's, and then he started to teach. And he went to the college in San Salvador and prepared himself for teaching. He went off to Jamaica, and Jamaica and Barbados, and he did stints there with his education. He is now Dr. Kirk Lopez.
Okay, very well done. So, when it comes to church, did you all attend church in Long Island?
Yes, we did. My parents were originally Baptists. Before my mother married my dad, he lived with a couple who were Seventh-day Adventists, the Edgecombe's. They were relatives of my mother, because my mother's people were Edgecombe's. And so he attended the Seventh-day Adventist church. Mommy didn't. She went to church on Sunday, a staunch Baptist too. And you may not have heard of Pastor NGM Nimhard, but he came out here as a colporteur. Pastor Nimhard went to Long Island as a colporteur, and he lived with the Turnquest family, who was Seventh-day Adventists at that time. He eventually married one of their daughters, Hazel, and took her to Jamaica. And I'm sure you remember Dr. Nimhard. It was only a couple of years ago that he was around. He's now deceased, but that was the son.
Okay.
So they had, his name was Leslie, and then they had a girl, Leslie and Linda. They had 2 children, but she lived in Jamaica. Her parents were Seventh-day Adventists, and it was at their house that whenever a colporteur went to Long Island, that person lived with them. And the church was like almost a stone's throw away from their house. Like in here was the church, and across the street there was their house. My father, when he married my mother, he was attending the Seventh-day Adventist church then, but of course at that time, marrying someone of another religion didn't mean anything to them. They were just getting married. So after they were married, my father continued going to the Seventh-day Adventist church, but my mom visited occasionally, but she never accepted the message at that time. And one Sabbath morning, when he got dressed for church, he said to my mom, why don't you go with me to church today? And she said, no, she says, I have to do the washing. And he said to her, say, don't wash today, come go with me. She said, no. He left. But she said, after he left, like something said to her, you should have gone. So she said she didn't have any time to change her clothes. She left her clothes that she was about to wash, she left them soaking, because they usually, soak them before they wash them. And she followed him afar until he got by the church. And she said there was a clump of bush right near the church, and she could hear everything that Pastor Nimhard was saying. And she said she stood in there and she listened and listened. And the sermon that he preached that Sabbath, she said, broke her heart. She stayed there until church was out, but she got out of the bush in time to get home before my father did.
Wow.
When he reached home, he noticed that there were no clothes on the line. And so he said to her, he said, Mom, you didn't wash today? So she said, no. And then she broke down crying and she told him what she had done. And that was the last Saturday that she ever did any work in the house. Wow. She followed him and eventually was baptized. And she remained a baptized member until she died in October 2014. She had me and Loretta.
Okay.
We were christened in the Baptist church. Here I'm talking about Pastor Sands, Clarice Sands' father. He used to be the pastor at that time, because when I went to get my first passport, I had to take my birth certificate, and the birth certificate was signed by him. I had to go to him for him to verify that he did christen me and that I was who they say I was. After Mommy became a Seventh-day Adventist, it was then that we went to church with her. Prior to that, she used to go to church on Sunday, and she used to take us every time. We had several colporteurs come up there from time to time, and they would talk to us about accepting the Lord as our personal Savior and everything. But at that time, we didn't know what this was all about. And, being young and carefree, you don't want to hear about death or anything like that. So when they tell you if you don't accept the Lord and you die, they say you go to hell. that didn't mean anything to us. We were young and spirited and we wanted to be with the crowd. But one thing my father never allowed, none of us could go to any dances or anything, even before my mother became a Seventh-day Adventist. And he said to her, you will not put a hole in any of my daughter's ears. You can't pierce it. So our ears were never pierced, but my mom had her ears pierced. And he was adamant about that, so she never did it.
So your education would have been at a government school? There were no Adventist schools?
No, they were just a government school. And in our district, there was the school called Scrub Hill in that area. I went to Scrub Hill. It was an all-age school, so you went from class 1 to class 6, and then you went from grade 1 to grade 6. That was as far as educational level was at that time. And it was a custom that when you became 14 years old, you were taken out of school.
Okay.
My grandfather, my mother's father, always said that you don't give girl children plenty education because they're going to get married and someone is going to take care of them. But it didn't make a difference for the boys because they took the boys out at 14 as well. And so when you became 14, oh, you were jubilant. You looked forward to coming out of school and sort of being like on your own or everything.
Wow.
But for me, I think God had a plan for my life. 2 weeks after I was taken out of school, there was a young teacher just from the College of the Bahamas who was the principal at that school, Mr. Everett Cartwright. He was a Long Islander. And he came to my parents and he said to them, I know what the norm is, but I want to ask you if you will let Naomi return to school. Say, because I see potential the exams that are being given, and these exams were set in the UK at that time. There were no local exams. You had to pass the British exams. And they didn't give you 1 or 2 subjects like they do today. If you pass English this time and math the next time, no. They had a set number of subjects. And when I took the BJC, I took 8 subjects. And you had to pass all of them or you had to redo it.
Wow.
He, in turn, when he asked them to let me come back to school, he said that he would give us extra classes in the evening. There was another young lady in there that she and I came out at the same time. And so he had asked her parents to let her return as well. So he said to my parents, he said, I'm going to ask the Ministry of Education to make them monitors, because that's what we were called, monitors, teaching the lower classes. I taught grades 1 through 3. And the other young lady, she taught grades 4 through 6.
And how old were you?
I was 14 when I started teaching, because just as I got 14, I left school. It took us 2 years to study for the exam. And so by the time I was 16, I sat the exam. And both of us were successful. We passed the exam. But what they did at that time, they gave you grades. Like if you got so many A's, then you maybe got a grade 1. Or if you got A's and B's, you got a grade 2. Or C's with it, you got a grade 3. The certificates went in that order. I got a grade 2. And so did the other young lady. So both of us got a grade 2 certificate. We didn't fail any of the subjects. We passed them all. Some with special credit, some just passed, but we passed them and we were awarded the certificate. The next year after that, we had to study for the senior Cambridge, but we only took a year for that. And we took 5 subjects in that.
That would have been, I guess, what we used to call GCE exam.
Yes. and we passed them. All this time, I was still teaching. Every year, we had to come to Nassau in the summer and attend summer school at the College of the Bahamas, which was in the old hangar in Oaksville.
So that was I didn't realize there was a College of the Bahamas before the actual College of the
They called it the college, but they had, at that time, yes, because students went to the college. But you were students having graduated from school and were interested in the teaching profession, and then you were sent to that.
So it was like a teacher's college.
Right, yes. And so every summer we came to Nassau and we were taught methods and things, how to improve with your teaching in Family Island. We had a Mr. Glanville Major from the Buckley's School, which was the tops at that time. And he came around periodically to check on the teachers and observe us teaching a lesson. We were never told when he was coming.
Okay.
The headmaster knew, but we didn't know. So you'll be teaching your class and in walks the inspector. And he'll say to you, go ahead and do your class, you know. And he would observe and everything. I think that was better too, because if I had known he was coming in advance, I probably would have been nervous and would not have performed as well as I did. So with them not telling us, we were in the throes of teaching, so we just went ahead and did what we had to do. I did that for 6 years.
So you were paid?
We were paid £1.16 a month.
Wow.
And that was plenty money.
Wow. So it was like a government paid?
It was government, yes, government paid us. Every month we were paid.
£1.16.
£1.16. And with that, I wasn't allowed to spend my money. At the end of the month, when I was given my envelope to bring home, I took that to my parents. My mom decided what was going to be done with the money, how it was going to be spent. But I, who worked for it, did not have an opportunity to take 1 penny out of that and spend it. Tragedy, however, in 1959 hit our home. It was Sunday morning, and my father had gotten up real early because we raised a lot of creatures, and he had gone out to attend to the creatures that were pastured away from the house. We had some in the yard and some were away. He went to check on them and then to bring feed for those that were in the yard. And just out of nowhere, it started to thunder and lightning. Mom wasn't doing well because that Sabbath she didn't go to church. So she was in the house because in those days you had your kitchen away from the house. You did all your work in the kitchen. When you left your house in the morning, you make up the beds and that's left alone, and you don't go back in there until in the night. And so we were all in the kitchen, and my father's mother was there with us. And it had 2 blasts of thunder and 2 flashes of lightning. The last flash of lightning, I saw the lightning run on the ground.
Oh, wow.
It ran the ground and went along. We were in the kitchen,
Okay.
but the doors and windows were open, and we were standing to the door looking at it. I saw it down on the ground and just run along, and you saw all the colors of the rainbow.
Oh.
My grandmother was terribly afraid of lightning. So whenever lightning came, she went under the table or whatever was there to shelter her, and she made us take tablecloths or something if you had a mirror or anything, and you had to cover them up. When the last blast of lightning and thunder came, and I saw it run on the ground, nothing more happened after that. But when we looked, we saw Mommy come in the kitchen, and she said to us, the lightning just struck the house. My oldest brother was asleep in my bed, which was adjacent to Mommy's bed. When the lightning struck, it came through the wall, through my bedroom, knocked out some of the cement wall, because it was wall, not wooden. The houses weren't wooden. They were made from sand and lime. And he got cut on his face, and he ran out, and we saw him, and he was bleeding. And the bolt from the lightning exited the back door. And my sister Loretta, when Mommy said lightning struck the house, she said, "Don't worry, say when Daddy comes, Daddy will fix that." We believe our Daddy could do any and everything. Mommy said, "Your Daddy is in the house." And she said, "If Daddy is in that house, he's dead." And she ran out through the door. The rain stopped and everything. And she went. And just as Mommy left Daddy standing in the door, because when he came to the door, he said to her, say, "Pass me a dry shirt because I'm wet." And she passed him the shirt. And she came out and she came to the kitchen. Now my Daddy had a way, when you tell him something, he never said anything. He would look at the situation before he responded. So he stood up there and was looking. And she said to him, say, "Bertram, say, you see what happened?" And he didn't say anything, so she thought, well, he was just observing. And when my sister ran to the house, just as Mommy left him standing in the door, he was standing there, and she took his shoulder to shake him. And when she shook him, he fell back in her hands, and he was dead. And we just heard her scream. And when she screamed, I ran out, and I went, and there Daddy was on the ground, eyes closed. Then Mommy came back, because she didn't realize that Daddy had been struck and was dead. Wow. His mother was there, so that was pandemonium. When something like that happens on the island, you have to go and get the magistrate or the constable, whoever's in law, and report what happened. So my mother's father was the one. He went and he told the neighborhood and went to the commissioner and everything and told them what had happened. Then now they have to come and they got to do what they call an autopsy and ask you questions and everything if you were there, what you saw and all like that.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 16. I was 16.
That was a traumatic experience.
At that time, if you died today, you were buried tomorrow. We didn't know anything about any morgues or anything like that, so they just buried you. They had something what they call the society, where you held membership and you paid a fee every month. So when you died, there was funds in there to bury you. They would make the coffin and everything, and then see that you were buried.
And how old was he?
And
how old was your father?
My father was 48 at that time.
Young.
And my mother was only 39.
And you were all very young.
We were all, my last brother was 13 months. He was 13 months on the 6th of September, and Daddy died on the 9th, not September, October, September, that's right, because Leslie is born in August. So he was 13 months in September the 3rd, and the 6th of September, Daddy died. And school was closed for the summer, and we were supposed to have gone to school the next day, which was Monday. We didn't go for a week. Daddy was buried, and after that, Mommy was left with 10 children by this time to take care of. No one to help her. Her brothers, they were all here in Nassau. They had families of their own. Her father was there, but there wasn't much he could do. Her mother was gone. Her two other sisters were here in Nassau, And she was on her own. But she did the best she could with us. And she was a disciplinarian. We could go nowhere, no matter what it was or where it was, if my brother didn't accompany the three of us. You can ask until the cows come home. If he can't go with us, we don't go. And that was the way when my father was alive. If we wanted to go anywhere to relatives that didn't live nearby, it was the same thing. And one thing he always said to us was, when you go, you leave your track, but not your name. Yes, Mrs. Olga Roach taught typing and shorthand in the evenings. So after teaching in the days, I went to classes over in Bahamas Academy's building and first I took up typing. Betty Bow from the Centerville Church, because I used to attend Centerville. When I came from Long Island, the church was on Shirley Street, so that's where I used to go to church. Then they moved over and they were worshiping in a part of Bahamas Academy, and we went there. And from there, we went to Centerville, the present location now of the Centerville Church. So we went in the evenings, and we had a test after a year, and we passed. So I was able to do typing, so I said, now I have to get to shorthand. So she started with shorthand with us, and Aquinas College used to teach the same subject in the evening too. Mrs. Roach went off to school for a quick review or something, and so we ended up to Aquinas College in the evening, and that was where I got my shorthand instruction. Having completed that, I was in the job market looking for work other than teaching. I didn't leave teaching then, but I started looking around, and I was given an interview, and the first interview, as a matter of fact, I was hired. But in the interim, Skinner's Secretarial School had come here from away, and there were two English teachers, Mrs. Slatter and Mrs. Pollock. They were the principals for that. And they did what you call speed writing along with typing. And so I went and I prepared myself to become a secretary. I was successful, and the first interview she sent me out to was in the Bitco building. And the gentleman he dictated to me a letter, and he had me type it. The letter was addressed to Mrs. Pollock, my teacher. And he told her, in this letter, he told her, thanks for sending me for the interview, and that I was hired on the spot. I had my first job, and I worked at a trust company.
So you were making more money then?
Mm-hmm.
So you made more money as a secretary?
Yes, I did. And then from that, after about 3 years or so there, jobs were everywhere. People were begging you to come. And so I left that and I went to Bahamas Commonwealth Bank and Trust, which is in the Chase Manhattan building on Shirley Street. And that was where I worked for about 7 years. My boss was an Englishman. And he was very, very good. Most of the workers in there were English. And the business was owned by Robert Vesco. Everybody must have heard about him. I stayed there until they liquidated the business. I left work the Friday evening and came home. And about half an hour after I got home, I got a phone call and saying, you don't have a job on Monday morning. One of the girls from the call. I said, what you mean don't have a job? They said, no, the bank has just been put into liquidation. I didn't worry about it. I knew that I knew my skills and I knew I was going to get another job. So the next week, I went in search of a job. And I got one right away. And it was the place called Arawak Bank and Trust. And I stayed there until they moved to the Isle of Man. They left Nassau and moved there, and I was there. And then, of course, after that, I went into the automobile business, and I left them in 1993 when the Japanese put them in liquidation. In 1962, I met the dashing, handsome debonair Henry Moncur from Nosecat Island. At that time, every Saturday night, the young people from church had social at Bahamas Academy. And at that time, all of the young people came out. So who was looking for a partner or what have you, that is where they congregated. They came out and I guess they looked you over and everything. They didn't say anything right away because when he met me, it must have been weeks before. I went to social every night, but we went along with other relatives on Shirley Street. And then one evening, I was on my way coming from work, and he was coming from work. He worked in Soldier Road, and I was working on Wolf Road. And he asked me, could he walk me home? So I said, I guess so. And so he walked me home, because my aunt said, you don't meet a young man in the street and stand up and talk to him. If he wants to talk to you, let him come here and talk to you. So he came, and he had a cousin who lived in the same yard as I did, because I had two aunts living there, and this cousin lived with my other aunt, my oldest aunt, Aunt Eunice. And they were cousins, so he told his cousin that he was interested in me and that she must talk to me to see whether I would give him the eye. Well, of course, you know, I was young and beautiful then, and I knew I could get what I wanted. So I was not in no hurry, Barbara. No, I wasn't in a hurry. But he pursued me, and eventually we became engaged. Before all of this, after I left teaching, I had gone into nursing. And so when he met me, I was doing nursing.
Okay.
I was 1 year away from becoming a graduated nurse. And he said to me one night when he came to see me, he said, I am ready to get married. And I said, well, I can't marry you now. I said, because I'm in nursing and I have 1 more year to do nursing. I said, and then after that, I would consider it. So he didn't say anything then, but the next time he came to see me, he said, now I'm giving you an ultimatum. It's you, the nursing, or it's me. That was a hard call to make. But because, like I said, I knew my mother depended on me too, of my younger siblings and everything, and I spoke to my aunt about it and everything. She told me she didn't think it was a wise choice. She told me, tell him if he can't wait until I am graduated as a nurse, then he needs to look elsewhere. But somehow my heart told me something different. And so I consented. I said, okay, I'll marry you. I resigned from my class, and Mrs. Hilda Bowen was the nurse in charge of the nurses then. And I gave her my resignation letter, and she didn't accept it. She said to me, if you have to get married, get married. We don't normally do this, but we'll take you back because you're almost finished. I took the letter back, and I went home, and I told my aunt, but she said, that's a foolish thing you did. And I told him, and he said, you're not finishing no nursing. It's going to be now or never. And so I had to go back and say to her that I'm sorry, but I was just going to have to quit. And I did. June 14, 1964, at exactly 3 p.m., that organ in the Centerville Seventh-day Adventist Church pealed out, "Here comes the bride." I was on time for my wedding. My friends were coming running here and they're trying to get in church. They couldn't. My girls had already all marched in and I was the last one. And we got married then. I gave birth to Sheena. 6 pounds, 5 ounces. He was ecstatic because she looked everything like him. And he said, "I'm now a man. I have a daughter." 2 years after that, Christopher was born. 8 pounds, 12 ounces. Bouncing baby boy. Well, he was even more happy then because he now has a son. And so I said to him, "We have 2 children. That's all we need." Didn't do anything about it. We just thought it'll happen like that. But along came Roger. 10 pounds, 12 ounces.
They got bigger every time.
When Pastor Roach christened him, Pastor Roach said to my husband, "Brother Moncur, you are a good carpenter. You build good houses." He said, "But you build better men." And 2 years after that, I was diagnosed with diabetes. My doctor then told me that I should have been told at the birth of that child to look out for diabetes because they say when you have babies born that big, it's a sign that that is it. But all during my pregnancies, they checked for everything like that and there was nothing. But 2 years afterwards, it happened. And I've battled diabetes for many years. I was one time weighing 150 pounds and I came down to 120. The weight just kept falling off of me. And I couldn't understand why, but after he told me what happened, then I realized what was happening. And I realized this was going to have to be a life change. Or other than that, I probably would not have been here today. Hence the reason that I did so much jogging in my younger days. And I can assure you that is what kept me alive. If I didn't do any exercise, I know I wouldn't be here today because a lot of other persons that I knew who had diabetes at the time I had, they've been long gone. But I was determined that I was going to fight it, and I did. Then, every time the church had a run, 10K, 5K, whatever it was, Naomi was in it. And you see those trophies up there? They belong to myself, my husband, and my last son. He was the only one that took off after us. Whenever there was a race, he was in it. And for me, very rare I came second. I was always first in my age group.
Wow.
And the first 10K that we won from the Adventist side of it, I won it for the Centerville Church. And the night when we did it on a Sunday, and they had service that Sunday night, but I didn't go to church. And Pastor Roach was asking for the runner for the day. He wanted to come in. So I put Centerville Church on the map. So when I went to Hillview, I did the same thing. And after a couple of years, I started walking. We used to walk. But I went every day, Monday through Friday, and I left this house at 4 o'clock. came back at 5:45 when I started walking. We were going from 4 o'clock. My husband would be right in the bed laying down. He didn't go. He trusted me that I was capable to go by myself without him. He did run with me in the first instance. We used to leave from here and go up to the bridge, the old bridge, go over that bridge and up to Merv Griffin's airport, come back, and I would go to Centerville to my classes and then come home, get the children ready for school, drop them to school, and find myself to work. I made the sacrifices. My daughter, after she started nursing, she worked at Mount Sinai. She was there for about 11 years. And during that time, that's when she went to school and she got her 2 masters. And so I volunteered to take care of the children so that she could go to school and work at the same time. I gave each of them equal opportunities because I didn't want one to say, Mommy did this for this one and didn't do for me. So they all had the chance. Roger, however, was the only one that chose to go off to the United States to school. He graduated in June 88, and in August 88, he entered Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. He left home to become an airline pilot. But of course, you know, they changed their majors. And so he did, and he decided that he wanted to become an engineer. So after 2 years at Andrews, he went to Walla Walla College in Washington State, and he trained as an engineer. He came home and he worked for about 3 years. Handsomely paid, of course, new engineer. And then we were going to a general conference. And he was going with us too. And we were supposed to have made the last payment like tomorrow. And today he said, Mommy and Dad, I need to talk to you all. I know what happened. I said, you what? I said, the money is paid. I said, you have to go. He said, no, I'm not going. He said, I feel the tug of the Lord at my heartstring. I want to go back to Andrews and take up the ministry. I was devastated, Barbara. I should not have been, because I reared them as best I could in the ways of the Lord. But here it is. I'm finished paying school fees for you to become an engineer, and you telling me you going back to school to take up the ministry? I didn't say it in so many words, but I guess he sensed my disappointment. But my husband said to him, say, well, son, if that's what you want to do, we will support you. He went to Andrews, he finished the ministry, he came back, and after a while, he got on with Bahamas Conference. And from there on, the rest is history. He got married in 2000. They sent him to Abaco. He had the Abaco district. He left Abaco. I think he was in Abaco 3 years, and then from there they moved him to Freeport. When he came to Freeport, he was the youngest president of the North Bahamas Conference. And he served out his time there. And when it was time to go back, he decided that he didn't want to go back. He didn't want it. He did not want the presidency post. Pastor Johnson begged him, but he said no. He just had his eye on ADRA from then. And so he ended up now, he is the person in charge of ADRA for the Bahamas.
What advice would you give to anyone watching this video? Based on everything that you have learned in life, your experiences, your relationship with God, your hard work, and what do you think would be the strongest piece of advice for any person watching this, whether they're young or old?
I would tell them, Barbara, no matter what obstacles you come up against in life, trust God. Had it not been for our trust in God, I know these children would not have turned out the way they did. We didn't have the funds to, say, send them to college and see that they all get a college education. The other two could have gone, but the opportunity for them to go was, at that time, everybody was going to West Indies College. And neither Sheena nor Chris wanted to go to West Indies College. So that was their choice. They didn't want to go there. And so that's why they didn't go. But it's not that we didn't give them the opportunity. And I would say, you look at things and you say, well, I need to have this or that. No. We are told, give of your funds to spread the message glorious. Give of your sons to speed them on their way. Pour out your heart in prayer, and whatever thou spendest, he surely will repay. So what money we had and we spent on these children, it now turns out that they are able to comfortably take care of themselves. We don't have to do it. And it's now their turn that they are turning to look after us. So I would say you train them in the way that the Lord wants them to go. They may not always remain there, but when they get older, they're going to come back. Be a good example to your children.
Mrs. Naomi Moncur came from humble beginnings in Turnbull, Long Island. She suffered the loss of her father at an early age and had to help her mother with 9 younger siblings, but she persevered. She put her trust in God and she believed in herself. She and her husband, Mr. Henry Moncur, were indeed good examples to their children. Sheena, Roger, and Chris, who have all achieved successes and have all made them proud. A legacy with children and grandchildren, she continues to contribute and to dedicate her life to her Creator, Almighty God.